Alright, welcome back, class. Pens and papers out. It's time for another lesson. This time we're going to talk about sideboarding in Levia. And as you can see, I've got a whole host of cards pulled up. And we're going to approach sideboarding in terms of, what the goal is in different matchups and how our sideboard choices help push us towards those goals. Obviously, as the different builds change and the meta changes, you're going to see different sideboarding options. Different cards will weave their way between the sideboard and the main board. But the goal of this video is to get you to a point where you can reliably establish, okay, I'm going into a slow matchup, I need to bring these cards in. I'm going into a fast matchup, I need to bring these cards in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about our equipment suite. So the Skullhorn, the Dance, just all of the darkness pieces. We've got Dance, Cloak, and Grasp. You usually never bring in Hood of Darkness because we already have such good options for Arcane Barrier in the head slot. So these are pieces that you're going to bring in mostly for wizards. Spoiled Skull is going to have a lot more options in general, but these pieces you're going to see coming in a lot for wizards. So especially these three pieces right here, you're going to bring them in for Kano. There's also a world where you bring them in for Acilio, just because Acilio, he's going to really turn the game just by having sort of a big mind warp turn. So if you are on like Grasp of Darkness plus Fleshbag, you can stuff one of his attacks and then use that Grasp of Darkness to really stop the rest of, or most of the damage from the mind warp. That's going to give you the space you need to hopefully kill him because he doesn't really block all that well. You'll often bring Skullhorn in for Kano as well. If you have Skullhorn in your list, there's merit to bringing it in for Verdance, but certainly Spoiled Skull right here. Spoiled Skull we bring in not just as an AB piece, but also into slower decks. So that's really the purpose of these equipment here, right? We're looking at Skullhorn. You bring this into Verdance if you have it. Definitely bring like Grasp and Cloak or Dance, whatever combination of these three you have, into Kano. Grasp also serves as a way to stop certain on-hit decks. So you can look at like into Aurora, bringing it in instead of AB. That way, when they try to Sigil of Suffering you pop the Grasp, and you don't take the 1 damage from the Sigil of Suffering. They don't draw a card off COV. It's pretty good. You can also bring it in for Prism. That way, if you can't pop something, right, you overblock by 1, they try to Angelic Wrath, and you pop Grasp in response, they can't hit you, right? And the downside of the Blood Debt isn't really all that big, or at least it shouldn't be that big in Levia. So Grasp is the big sideboard piece that you'll often see. It's the easiest to slot in just because, as we'll see later, there's a lot of competition for this foot slot in terms of equipment, and there's a lot of competition for the chest slot in terms of equipment. But Grasp, you're only really competing with maybe Null Rune Gloves, which I forgot to grab for this, and Apex Bonebreaker. Not a lot of competition for this. Now, let's take a look at some other... where's my eraser? Let's take a look at some, doing it live, at some other pieces of sideboard tech. Cool, we'll just clear this out while I look for the eraser. So, as I talked about earlier, we do have access to Arcane Lantern if we want to bring this in. So, Arcane Lantern and Spoiled Skull both serve this Arcane Barrier 1 slot, and both cover that. It's a question though of whether you want to have access to only one claw, right? So we're looking at this. We're going to take a more defensive posture. That's not at all what I want. Take a. We're going to take a more defensive posture here, where Spoiled Skull allows us to be more offensive. Right? We're giving up a claw for the Arcane Lantern. And often we'll do that because we want to bring in Scowling Fleshbag, right? Scowling Fleshbag, the ceiling on that card to prevent upwards of 10 damage is incredible. So we'll often bring in Arcane Lantern when we're okay playing a slower game, and we really, really want the on-hit of, or not the on-hit, but the prevention effect from Scowling Fleshbag when it's really important. So that's why you'll see some lists on Arcane Lantern. Don't bring this into Kano. Kano kills you by having enough time to set up. So if you can just blast Kano into the sun, that's perfect. Spoiled Skull is, however, one of the best tools Levia has access to. Not only does it allow you to just sort of have that AB1 just in your inventory, and into slower decks like a Florian or a Verdance, you're gonna get so much value and so much distance out of the Spoiled Skull. But on top of that, you cannot forget the active ability of Spoiled Skull. Let me zoom this up. Let me expand this so you can actually read it. Right? So action, target this. Action, banish this. Target 3 action cards with different names in your banish zone. Choose one at random. You may play it this turn. So into fatigue decks, even fatigue decks like CYB Bravo, who you want usually to maybe block with that extra armor to prevent those crush effects. You're bringing Spoiled Skull because as you get to the later game, you're able to have, let's say, a Dread Screamer, a Shadow Realm Horror, and a Blood Rush Bellow in Banish. And you can pop the Spoiled Skull, guarantee another AP, and certainly if you hit that 4th Blood Rush, having access to 4 Blood Rush in a game is often more than most decks can deal with. Also, when it comes to offense, in certain matchups that can really play around the Fleshbag, and it becomes more of just a block 2, having the Spoiled Skull as just an on-demand, okay, these cards are in my banish, I need a Blood Rush and I need it this turn, this hand doesn't have Blood Rush, cool, Spoiled Skull. We're going to look for that extra AP to unlock this hand and keep the pressure going against this deck that I need to be very aggressive against. So even though Spoiled Skull does have that AB1 and it doesn't block, it enables so much more offense because it gives us access to so many more cards. All right. Now let's take a look at some of the less arcane focused pieces. So here we have Scabskin Leathers, Scabbies, as I preach the truth of, the Hooves of the Shadow Beast. These are the two main contenders for our foot slot. And they serve two pretty different roles. So Scabskins do one of two things. Allow us to be super unfair with AP, and also give us 3 block. Right, 2 on the first block, 1 on the second. So you'll bring them into different matchups for different reasons. You always bring them into Azalea, right, because they just block for so much, and it just gives us so much armor. And certainly into more aggressive metas, where you are required to block more, you want the Scabskin Leathers to come in. Also for decks where you need multiple AP constantly, think Prism, if you're on a slower list, or there were some trains of thought that like Enigma was a list that you wanted to roll Scabs into constantly, just to make sure that you can constantly convert your entire hand. That's when you bring Scabskin Leathers in. Hooves of the Shadow Beast, again, really big for beating fatigue. The reason that you bring it in is, you don't care so much about how much they block. Yes, it's great that they block for 1, and you would love to cash that in. But having that extra AP on demand to really break a fatigue deck's back is super, super important. Now, there is merit to bringing in hooves into a more aggressive matchup, right? Sometimes in certain matchups, you just need that one extra AP. All you need across a game is one extra AP, and having that guaranteed AP is super, super important. So, depending upon the meta, usually a faster deck, a faster meta will necessitate having more scab skins or more on hits, right? If you need to block more on hits to not just die, have more scabs. You bring scab skins into more matches as opposed to the hooves. Another thing to keep in mind is that hooves are also +1 graveyard. Sometimes you need that extra card in graveyard to get that last blood debt attack off, to close the game, or to put yourself in a commanding position. So that's another thing to consider with hooves versus scab skins. Now, something to mention with respect to scab skins. Scab skins are scary. Well, a lot of people think they're scary, but they're not. They're very friendly. Look, they even smile at you. The way math for scab skins works is you have a 1 in 6 chance to get no AP your tournaments. You have a 2 in 6 chance to get 1 AP, and you have a 2 in 6 chance to get 2 AP, and you have a 1 in 6 chance to get 3 AP. Your average outcome for AP, right? If you roll scab skins, the average AP output is 1/3 plus 2/6. 2/3 plus 1/2. So for those of you keeping track at home, 1/3 plus 2/3 plus 1/2. The average AP you get for rolling scab skins is, 3 halves. You get 3 halves AP, right? 1/3 plus 2/3 plus 1/2. You get 1.5 AP on average every time you roll scab skins. And we can see we have a 1 in 6 chance that your turn just ends and maybe you die. Rolling scab skins, as I say, requires wisdom and courage. You need to know when it's worth rolling, right? Is it going to lose me the game if I roll? Is it going to lose me the game if I don't roll? Is my only way to win this game to roll? So, if you're gonna be afraid of scab skins, don't register them. I'm gonna tell you right now, don't register them. Or don't roll them. There have been a lot of metas where I registered scab skins not to roll them just because I wanted that block. But certainly, don't be afraid of scab skins. They are your friend, and they are here to help you more than they are here to hurt you. For those of you who have heard of this, you work with confirmation bias when it comes to scab skin leathers. You remember all of those times that you needed to not roll a 1, and you rolled a 1, and the game ended, and you lost, and you cried about it on Twitter. Now, Savage Sash is one of the 2 main chess pieces we run, but I'm putting it in the sideboard because, as far as I'm concerned, Husk is really the main chess piece we're looking for. So the goal of Savage Sash is to get more than 6 value, right? Because on the surface, we're looking at, okay, Husk blocks for 6 value, done, easy. But Savage Sash can get you more than 6 value, right? You're always going to get the 2 value from block. And then it becomes a question of, okay, does this cost reduction get you an extra attack, right? If the cost reduction gets you an extra attack, that's an extra 6 value. So you got 8 value out of your chest, maybe even more depending on the context of your hand. But we don't need that every game, right? There's a lot of games where we want that 6 block. We want to just be able to say, oh, nice CNC. Here's my carrion Husk. I get to carry on with my 5-card hand, and I get to crush you into the ground. So we often bring Carrion Husk in, not Carrion Husk, Savage Sash when we're dealing with wizards, right? Because wizards aren't going to attack us. So this is just +1 graveyard. Unless you're on Cloak of Darkness. But for wizards, right, you want them dead, you want them dead quickly. Verdance is an entirely different proposition just because Verdance will send Felling of the Crown and Plow Under at you sometimes, and being able to put Husk in front of that is very nice. But certainly Acilio and Kano, being able to just put Savage Sash in front of them and say, nope, I'm not going to let you graveyard starve me. Actually, Acilio is not even a good idea. Acilio also sends a lot of damage at you, but I guess specifically Kano. Savage Sash just allows you to say, no, you're not going to graveyard starve me. On top of that, it allows you to get more aggressive. So you'll also bring this into matchups where you're just not getting the 6 block value. Often you'll see, people will bring this into Kasai, right, to further augment your damage output, 1, on a Blood Rush turn, but 2, Kasai doesn't send a lot of 8 power, 6 to 8 power attacks. She can send some every once in a while, but for the most part, you're not going to get that much value out of it. So blocking for 2 and then being able to enable like a 4-5 wide Blood Rush off like Savage Sash plus Hooves is really, really important for closing out that game. Or he's gone now, but Zen sent maybe 1 big attack a game. You're not getting the full 6 value out of your Husk. So you run Savage Sash instead to allow you to get at least 6 value, if not more, while still getting the full block value out of your equipment. So Sash definitely has its place, but like I said, it is not the primary chess piece. It is our secondary chess piece. And I believe that does it for our sideboard cards. The next thing we're going to look at, our sideboard equipment. The next thing we're going to look at are our recursion pieces. With the advent of Call to the Grave, right here, the deck got a lot more consistent in terms of being able to put these recursion pieces, which allow us to lean into one of Levia's biggest strengths, and really just get ridiculous amounts of value turn by turn. Where is Ghostly? There's Ghostly. So these are our recursion pieces. Now some Hexagore people will tell you that Grim Feast is a recursion piece. Don't believe them. You're going to bring in different recursion pieces for different setups. Every once in a while you will see Mutated Mass in a sideboard. I put it here just because it's a recursion piece. Very, very rarely it is a sideboard piece. Instead, you usually put it in your main board if you're going to put it in your main board. And I will replace it with Hungering Demigon. So, Howl from Beyond and Deep-Rooted Evil are stacked next to each other on purpose. They are stacked next to each other because these right here are our fatigue killers. When you're playing into a slower deck, your goal is to get Howl from Beyond and Deep-Rooted Evil into rotation as soon as possible for as long as possible. Turn 0, Call the Grave, hell yeah. Howl from Beyond hits first, and then Deep-Rooted Evil second. Howl from Beyond into these slower matchups is just claw number 3. Right? If we pull this up, the next attack action card you play this turn gets +3 for 2 resources. What else is 3 damage for 2 resources? Mandible Claw. So this is claw number 3. This allows us to not only use extra AP on any turn, because that is one of the problems that we can run into in a longer game, is being sort of AP starved. Not only does this allow us to use extra AP, but against more fatiguey decks, they're not attacking us as much. So they're kind of waiting for us to just run out of cards in graveyard, and then we kill ourselves, right? We die to Blood Debt. Howl from Beyond is always that extra card that we can just put in our graveyard for free. On top of that, let's say you have 2 blues in hand, or you have 2 blues and then another resource in hand, and you have 2 cards in graveyard. What you can do, assuming the other 2 cards in hand are a Dread Screamer and like a Graveling Growl, you can go Howl from Beyond, from Banish, 3rd card, so that's a blue, pitch a 2nd blue to Dread Screamer. You got 2 resources floating that comes in for 9, that banishes the Howl from Beyond, use the other 2 resources floating, play the Howl from Beyond again, because it's not once per turn, and then send the Graveling Growl. And you're looking at a 15 damage turn, right? No. you're looking at an 18 damage turn, but you've only used 2 cards in deck because you recycled that Howl from Beyond. So Howl from Beyond really opens you up to some incredible nonsense against these slower decks. Same thing for Deep-Rooted Evil. Now, obviously, Deep-Rooted Evil you can't take advantage of having, being able to play it multiple times in a turn, unless you're doing some real weird agility and AP shenanigans. But what Deep-Rooted Evil allows you to do is convert every single Dread Screamer you have, every single Dread Screamer and Shadow Realm Horror you have, and blue, into 6 damage. It is effectively a free Hexagore, except you don't have to build your deck around a subpar weapon. Free Hexagore into these slower matchups just absolutely crushes them in terms of damage value. And again, this 6 damage doesn't really come at the cost of a card in deck, because you're just playing it from banish. It goes right into your graveyard. On top of that, if you, let's say your hand doesn't have a banisher, but you have a Deep-Rooted Evil in banish, you can call to the grave for a Beast Within. Beast Within triggers, banishes a 6. Now you can play the Deep-Rooted Evil. So there's just a lot of extra options you have to take advantage of with Howl from Beyond and Deep-Rooted Evil in your banish zone that allows you to just absolutely destroy fatigue decks. Additionally, you'll see people bring these in against assassins just because assassins want to banish cards, right? If you've ever had an assassin just banish a Howl from Beyond or a Deep-Rooted Evil off the top of your deck, they gave you 1 extra intellect for free. You didn't do anything. They gave it to you. Or maybe playing against Sanu, being able to block with a Howl from Beyond or block with a Ghostly Visit, right? Block on their stealth card. Cool. You have 5 intellect for that turn, right? You block for 2 or 3, and you still have a card that you get to play from banish. They just allow Levia to do such incredible nonsense, honestly, that really kind of breaks the game in a way that is increasingly necessary to keep up in the fab world in which we live. The next card I want to talk about is Ghostly Visit. Ghostly Visit you usually bring in for aggro matchups. That's because you don't really care about getting this incremental power over time. You're playing Ghostly Visit maybe 2 times in a game. But the important thing is it allows you to like block with 3 cards or block with 2 cards and then go like Dread Screamer, banish the Ghostly, play the Ghostly, right? So it allows you to get just significantly more defensive value or offensive value depending on how the game is going, out of a 1 cost card that blocks for 3 that we can just recur. Again, we're looking to break that sort of number parity that will allow us to get the edge in those decks. Finally, Hungering Demigon is the other recursion piece. This one comes in exclusively against light heroes, and it's pretty obvious why. When it hits, banish a card from their soul, banish a card from the defending player's soul, and then if they have 1 or more cards in their soul, you may play it from your banish zone. In big Prism metas, people will play this. I don't know if you've ever played Prism into a Hungering Demigon. It is brutal. The ability to kind of recur it every single turn means that Prism never really gets an opportunity to do anything. Bolton's also a really bad matchup. So this gives us a better Bolton matchup because it gives us a recurable on hit, right? Bolton wants to keep cards in his soul so he can keep pressure on us. And this kind of allows us to push him off that soul. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about are I completely missed one of the recursion pieces, and I'm sure somebody somewhere is yelling at me for this. There it is, Guardian of the Shadow Realm. That's fine. Guardian of the Shadow Realm doesn't actually have text. Here we go. This right here, Guardian of the Shadow Realm doesn't have text. Ignore this text. Guardian of the Shadow Realm comes in against aggressive decks. So this is something we bring in when we can actually make use of this 6 in the bottom right hand corner. Bring this in against KO, KO or just brutes in general, Vincent, and Azalea. Right? Decks where we can kind of control when we flip. And that's a big difference between Guardian and Ghostly. Ghostly is if we can't really control if we flip. Because if we cannot control the flip, we're not going to get to take advantage of Guardian, where that Ghostly just coming in for like 8 value over the course of a game is really important, just being able to play that from Banish. People also bring this in against Assassin. Obviously, merit to it, right? It's a D-React that you can stash in Arsenal and then play again. Maybe you have an extra AP. You can, recur it, put it back in Arsenal, and just make their life hell. Listen, we already have a 6 block for Assassin. It's called Carrion Husk. We don't need another one. That's why Thick-Hide Hunter isn't good for Levia. Guardian of the Shadow Realm, though, is super strong. So for those of you who don't know, pairing this with Blasmafet, which I don't think I have a photo of. Correct. Pairing this with Blasmafet, it's very easy to forget that Blasmafet Levia consumed says once per turn. Now, once per turn, you may play a card with Blood Debt from your Banish zone. So the fact that this has Blood Debt, your opponent's turn is a turn, you can convert 1 card in hand into 6 block is super important. It really allows you to crack open the KO matchup, and against Vincent, you can pitch a blue to mitigate 7 damage. Right? They send a Rune Chant, pitch a blue, AB1, Guardian of the Shadow Realm. You put you so far ahead, and then against Azalea, if you flip with Guardian and Husk up, they can't win. They absolutely cannot win. Because, they dominate an arrow for 14, and you go, cool, here's Husk, here's Guardian, here's a card from hand, maybe, or another piece of equipment. It's cost you 1 card to block a 14 dominate arrow, which is most of the time the best that they can send. This is checkmate into Azalea in Banish. So super, super important into those matchups, and you bring it into those aggro matchups where you can control whether or not you flip. And yes, occasionally you are in a position where you can pay 2 resources and return Guardian of the Shadow Realm. Don't bank on it. It's not going to happen all that often. All right, so now we're finally out of Recursion, and we're going to look at some of the sideboard pieces. And I'm going to look at blue sideboard pieces. Not every list will have blue sideboard pieces, but one of the greatest advantages Levia has is that her blues are not just pitch fodder. And it is becoming less of an advantage specific to Levia, but it is still an advantage that she has. Her blues are not just there to pitch and block. Her blues are genuinely there to be some of her most powerful cards. Now, we have entered the era of digital deck submission, so unfortunately, new players will no longer know the hell that is registering Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell on a deck registration sheet. But Convulsions is a very good card to, again, kill fatigue. Levia, in case you can't tell, is very good against fatigue. Right? The ability to just say, here's a +1, you have no arsenal, the game is super late, you have no armor, +1 dominate, you die. Or if you're ever on a CNC list, right? +1 dominate, CNC, game ends, no matter what they have. Super important to just kind of end games. Sometimes you'll see Unworldly Bellow and Barraging Beatdown in sideboards because maybe you'll swap them in depending on the matchup. Unworldly Bellow is really, really good into aggro decks because it's a blue that also allows you to turn off your Blood Debt. And certainly when we already run a number of 2 costs like maybe Pulping or Swing Big or Wild Ride, the ability to pitch a blue and turn off Blood Debt plus send a little bit of extra damage, very, very useful. Barraging Beatdown just kind of beats everybody. It's one of Levia's best blues. It's 5 value on a blue. It's so hard to beat. Barraging Beatdown, you'll often see people remove if they expect News to be in the field, just because it's too good of a blue. New will play it and absolutely run roughshod over you. Reckless Swing, you'll see sometimes in sideboards to be able to beat decks which just refuse to die. Sometimes, right, you'll be able to get a deck down to 2, but then you can't actually break through them. Reckless Swing just does it. It ends games. It's also good into aggro. So if you kind of have room for Reckless Swing, bring it in against aggro. And there is sort of like the Kano cycle where you have like Kano does well, people bring AB, Kano stops doing well, people stop respecting Kano, Kano does well, so on and so forth. The same thing happens with Reckless Swing, where people respect the Reckless Swing, they make decisions to not go below 3, and then you stop bringing Reckless Swing in, so people stop respecting Reckless Swing, and then you start bringing Reckless Swing in, and people start dying to Reckless Swing, so then they start respecting Reckless Swing, and the cycle repeats. Cycles in and out. And it's one of those things that people always have to think about when they're playing against Brute. Very good card. Tear Limb from Limb. On the surface, it's a no-block blue that costs 2. But the best argument I ever heard for Tear Limb from Limb is that this is a blue Wild Ride. And I know that people are getting off the flippy doos at this point, but a blue Wild Ride is a pretty good place to be. And it can even be better than a blue Wild Ride, right? Tear Limb from Limb, discarding a 6, turns on Claws, and then let's say you have a Shaden Death Hydra or a Swing Big in hand. That is suddenly such an incredible amount of damage. Plus, it puts 2 cards in your graveyard, right? This also puts 2 cards in graveyard. Barraging only puts 1. Tear Limb from Limb putting 2 cards in graveyard cannot be overstated. Very, very powerful card. My current version of Levia actually has all 3 of these come in, the Convulsions of Reckless and the Tear Limb. I bring them in for fatigue matchups just because they're blues that you pitch away first cycle, and then when they come back around second cycle, you use them to push damage to end the game. Decks nowadays are really good at blocking, so if they want to be. So having these ways to dominate, to send 2 effectively unblockable damage, to have an extra 6 damage and AP in hand is super, super important for breaking those slower matchups. Okay, we're now going to take a look at sort of the last section of sideboard cards, which are just the kind of miscellaneous ones, the non-recursion, non-blue tech cards that you might see. Writhing Beast Hulk is certainly an option that you'll often see in sideboards. Pulping as well. And trying to think, that should be it, really. Every once in a while you'll see like maybe a yellow tech card in a sideboard, but those will be explained to you. Shadow of Blasmafet is on its way out. Or cards like Sink Below or like Fate Foreseen. Every once in a while some weird cards making in the sideboard. This is again to kill defensive decks, and this is to kill offensive decks. Writhing Beast Hulk, having Dominate, especially if you like Tear Limb from Limb. 12 Dominate just kind of ends games. It's really nice. Oh, I forgot my other buddy. Where are you, buddy? There you are, buddy. Shaden Death Hydra. So, Writhing Beast Hulk ends games. Pulping into defensive decks that don't really run D-Reacts. Super, super big, right? The ability to not only force 3 damage, but enable a 3-wide turn off Pulping and put 2 cards in your graveyard. It does everything Levia wants it to, except for sometimes missing. Obviously, that is no bueno. We don't want that. But Pulping, when it is a good Pulping meta, Pulping does such incredible work to ending games and to just progressing you towards the game state you want to have. Finally, Shaden Death Hydra. I'll give it a nice big section. Shaden Death Hydra is an incredible card, again, for defeating defensive decks. In case you haven't noticed, Levia is incredible at defeating defensive decks. And most of her sideboard is dedicated to sort of defeating those defensive decks, because you will run into them. Shade and Death Hydra, also really good against New. Because New can turbo fill your banish zone. So like flipping into Blasmafet with 11 to 13 cards in banish, and then sending a turn that's like Dread Screamer into Shade and Death Hydra. Obviously it's a 5-card hand, but it's a 5-card 19. It kind of just kills people. There's also the pitch stack plan. So if you know where your power blues are, like the Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, if you would stop spazzing out, please. Like Convulsions, which gives Dominate, or like Tear Limb from Limb. This is a brute attack, so Tear Limb from Limb will double its power. Turns out 26 damage on an attack is a lot of damage. Now, you obviously don't want to send a Tear Limb Shade and Death Hydra unless you're ending the game, although, like I said, usually 26 damage does a pretty good job of ending the game. Just because neither of these cards banish, and you obviously will have 13 cards with Blood Debt in your banish zone, you may well just instantly die. But the idea of knowing where your blue power cards are, knowing where your power cards are in your pitch stack, building up enough Blood Debt, and then allowing yourself to flip, and then just banishing all of your cards so that your next hand are those power cards, and you can just end the game right there. That is something that is available to Levia. Now, we haven't had to use that in a while, just because the meta hasn't been particularly slow since the release of Mistveil. It's just been kind of very, very fast ever since Mistveil. So now that the meta is slowing down a little bit, hopefully we can utilize some of these pitch stack ideas. And before anybody says anything, yes, I know that Call to the Grave does shuffle your deck, but you can also choose most turns whether you use Call to the Grave, so it really isn't that bad. Shade and Death Hydra, just huge game-ending threat, but also don't be afraid to just block with it. It blocks for 3. It's a card with power 6 or greater, and certainly against Prism, they're not stopping a 13 power popper. So it really gives you just a lot of options in a single card. That was my comprehensive guide to, or I hope comprehensive guide to sideboarding in Levia. Any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments. You can always reach out to me on Discord if you're in the League of Levia. If you're not, the Discord will be linked in the description. And hopefully you're blessed by Plasma.